Hello, YouTube. So I've been a big fan of Higurashi When They Cry for years, and I will definitely talk about that in a future video. But just recently, the past few months, I have been playing through, for the first time, the Umineko When They Cry visual novel. I finally finished that up, so I thought I would get on here and share my thoughts on the characters, and of course I'll get into the story elements too. So there will be spoilers for Higurashi in here, and of course Umineko spoilers. I've also seen Go and Sotsu, so those will also be referenced. There's your warning. Coming into Umineko, I was expecting it to be like Higurashi, and there are similarities, but there are a lot of differences. I would say, fresh out of it, I still prefer Higurashi. I think that is a perfect story from beginning to end. But I really enjoyed Umineko for what it was. Now getting into the characters. I won't go in order of favorites because there's so many. They've all had such different roles to play. But I will start with the woman of Umineko, Beatrice. Beatrice starts off as the main villain. She's the Golden Witch Beatrice. The first chapter, she's not even in it until the very end because they're just hyping up her name and her legacy. Everybody knows who Beatrice is. They fear her. They see her picture on the wall. And she has quite the impact on the world of the Ushiromiya family. It gets revealed that she is the main villain at the family conference. Everybody starts dropping dead. And the cause of those murders is Beatrice, who is sending them letters, teasing what's about to go down. She was quite the villain, but she was challenged by Butler, who they enter a meta game of sorts where they're fighting over, is it magic or is it a trick? Butler denies the existence of Beatrice, but Beatrice is like, nope, it's me, I'm here, you can't deny me. We first see the mystique of Beatrice as a villain begin to crack. I mean, I guess in chapter 2, we see her backstory a bit, and she's able to get along with Shannon, for instance. It was in chapter 3 where you really start to see Beatrice in a different light. She is sidelined as the main villain by Eva Beatrice, who goes on to torment everybody in Beatrice's place, and Beatrice ultimately helps to defeat Eva Beatrice. It was at this point where I really started to be intrigued by what Beatrice had going on. I was already interested before, but this took it like a step up. At the end of the chapter, we get the reveal that it was all part of a grand scheme. She intentionally introduced the villain to gain some sympathy from Battler. Part of me is like, was that really a trick? It felt a little too real for me. Beatrice seemed to be enjoying herself a bit too much there. That reveal itself, though, that was one of the coolest moments in Umineko. Chapter 3, ooh, what a chapter. But it is revealed that there was some truth in it because she goes on in the rest of the chapters to feed more and more into what Battler says, and they get along more. We finally see Beatrice crack when Butler forgot what he did to Shannon. That death of Beatrice gave birth to the two split Beatrices, one who was more focused on the magic, one who was more focused on the human, but she was still being impacted by the spider webs, I believe. That was a cool dynamic to see those two Beatrices try to figure everything out together. I enjoyed that for what it was. Before that, we had Beatrice down and out for pretty much all of chapter 5. And then we got that in chapter 6. It was finally in chapter 7 where we got the backstory reveal for Beatrice. The original Beatrice was from Italy back when Kinzo was young and it was wartime. They fell in love despite being on opposing sides. The gold was from the war. So her and Kinzo fell in love and they had a baby who was also Beatrice. And that Beatrice passed with Rosa, and that was Rosa's experience with Beatrice. That Beatrice had the unfortunate fate of having a child with Kinzo. You know what that implies. And the Beatrice that came from that is the Beatrice who was in our present day version of the story. Well, present day, 1980s. That Beatrice was known as Claire. Claire is the child who Natsuhi rejected from Kinzo, and they believed to be dead, but she was not dead. Bern Castell found the rare fragment of when Natsuhi did accept the child, and that child became Leon. Leon was a more normal girl compared to Beatrice, except for the added touch that she knew all the ins and outs of the Ushiromiya family, and she had great leadership qualities. Leon had a fun dynamic with Willard, who was introduced in chapter 7 as just like a basic detective guy. And their dynamic had an epic payoff at the end of chapter 7 when Will saved Leon with his sword, and what a moment that was. There were some cool action moments throughout Umineko that I quite enjoyed. But we got to watch Leon really grapple with seeing what would become of her if she was Claire and not Leon. So that was an interesting dynamic to see unfold. Now, Claire, being the rejected one, she was placed into the care of the servants and became a servant herself. We saw her develop a cute bond with Shannon and they were friends until Claire erased herself from the world to go into the magical world, and Shannon didn't even know she was missing. It was sad. She was introduced to the world of magic through Gap. They were calling her Beatrice at the time because they all assumed it was Beatrice. She was running around doing little mischievous things like misplacing keys. Shout out to Gap. She's a cool character and I will be blaming her for my missing items moving forward because that is so funny. Back to Claire, she had that devastating backstory of why she left the human world for magic. And the backstory definitely made sense, and I was happy with it when it finally got revealed. She wanted Shannon to join her in the magical world, but Shannon refused. She still kept in touch with Shannon though, and she watched as Shannon suffered as Battler stopped coming to the family conference every year, even though he promised to come rescue Shannon. Eventually, Claire took on Shannon's love of Battler, and that's how her and Battler got so intertwined. Well, that backstory with how she was upset with Battler is the main reason given for why Beatrice went down the path that she did. There's definitely a lot more to it when you look into it. So much sad stuff there for the backstory of Beatrice that all explains how she went down the path that she did. Beatrice is undeniably a standout character, one of the best characters here. But I will say her dynamic with Butler is probably my main issue of Umineko as a whole. Too much prominence was placed on their dynamic, and not enough was placed on Beatrice as an individual, I would say. And aren't they cousins too? Technically. So, very weird. And I wish it wasn't as big of a focal point as it ended up being. It was one of the more annoying dynamics even before I knew the cousin point that I I just don't buy into their dynamic at all. It's not enough to ruin Beatrice for me. I think she's phenomenal. But I don't like Butler and Beatrice's dynamic at all, really, I would say. Speaking of, I'll move on to Butler. He is the main character. I would say he's very obnoxious. That's how I would describe Butler. The most annoying moments in the first few chapters were him just refusing to accept magic. In hindsight, I can understand how that plays into the story, but just watching it on first go, oh my gosh, I was so sick of Butler. I felt like I was being gaslit. Like, oh my, just give it up. I'm seeing all these witches here myself. Are you not seeing it? Gosh, she's right in front of you. Then in the end, he does accept magic, and he's on the other side of it trying to convince Ange to accept magic herself. It makes sense in the story, but it was very hypocritical, and it makes me not like Butler. In hindsight, I do respect it, but it just drove me crazy, and I don't think I'll ever like Butler. Like, ugh, just so, it was so annoying. I just felt like I was being gaslit every time we get into the discussion of magic and truth. I understand the purpose of it, but before I put the pieces together, oh my gosh, it was so annoying. I'm right there with Beatrice being annoyed at him for forgetting his promise to Shannon. Oh, you just don't do that. Oh, I'm sure they're kids, but no. Even as a kid, I kept my promises. Thank you. Butler's staying as the main character pretty much for the whole run of Umineko reminds me how thankful I am for Higurashi for swapping out Keiichi about halfway. I will say my favorite thing about Butler was the surprise twist of Kiri actually being his mom. I was able to guess it, but it was such a cool reveal and it was so exciting when it got confirmed. Overall, Butler definitely served his purpose as a main character, but due to his prominence, he also stuck out to me as being more annoying, and I was able to pick out his flaws easier, and they just drove me crazy. Moving on, I'll speak about Ange, who was pretty much the main character, I would say, of the story, even though she wasn't there from the beginning, and I found her to be a much more compelling main character than Butler. She is the child of Rudolph and Kiri, just like Butler. They didn't know that at first, but she came into play late in the story because she was too sick to attend the original family conference. She was the youngest in the family, and when we finally get to meet her at the end of chapter 3, she's all aged up, and we get to see what happens in the future after the family conference when everybody besides Eva died. She was raised by Eva, and she grew to really despise Eva and blame Eva for everything. She really believed that Eva was behind the incident. Eva eventually died, and then she gave Ange all of the inheritance, which led to Kyrie's sister, Kasumi, hunting Ange down for the money. And that was an interesting little wrinkle. I would say Umineko overall is about grief, and I would say that was best represented through Ange, which is why I would say she was the far more compelling main character. She really struggled to accept the loss of her family. That's why she was on the hunt for the truth, and she was really giving it her all. That was her life, trying to avenge her family, really. The end of Umineko, you're faced with the choice of Ange choosing between magic and choosing to view her family in a positive light, or getting down to the truth of what actually happened. And sometimes the truth isn't always what you want it to be. When she chose the truth, she became a hardened detective like Erica. When she chose magic, she got to get closure with Butler, as it's revealed he did survive, but he had amnesia. And they get to have one last conversation that's pretty bittersweet. I thought both of these endings were pretty solid endings for Ange's character. I enjoyed them both for what they were. I really enjoyed her dynamic with Eva. We most got to see her embracing the magic as she embraced her dynamic with her family, as she accepted the truth that Eva was not the killer, and it's revealed that Eva was actually protecting her. We see just how much Eva really loves Ange, and it was really sweet. Overall, Ange is just a badass, complex character, and she's definitely one of the shining lights of Umineko. I enjoyed her from beginning to end. Speaking of the truth, we've got Erica, the detective. She later is the Witch of Truth. Erica's motivation was to find the truth at all costs. She didn't care what it meant. You would think the truth would be moral, but through Erica, we see that the truth can be just as evil as magic. Erica was definitely an interesting addition to the answer arcs because we thought she was gonna solve all the mysteries and bring everything to light. That was when we thought that this was gonna be like Higurashi, but this isn't like Higurashi. There's much more to the story, and as the story evolved beyond the game, we see that there's more truth beyond just the game. So Erica was a good way to subvert expectations as the story evolved, I would say. Erica was Bern Castell's piece, and she would have done anything to please Bern Castell, because that's what she was meant to do. I had sympathy for Erica as just another piece on the board, but she was so villainous, and especially in chapter 6, I believe, when she personally ensures that every piece is dead so there's no room for confusion. That was one of the most shocking but impressive reveals in Umineko. Like, wow. That is just wow. I love how Erica parallels both Butler and Ange. She represents what happens when you lean too far into the truth and you forget the emotions at play. Butler was on track to becoming like Erica until she became his foe. And then in the ending where Ange chooses the truth, she pretty much becomes Erica and they team up somewhat. Erica's sit down with Ange as the two witches of truth was one of the most interesting scenes of that last chapter, I would say. Erica's only ally was Dlanor. Dlanor was sent by the Court of Heavens to come establish the truth about Kinzo being dead. Her dynamic with Erica definitely seemed lesbian to me. It did. They definitely had that energy. But Dlanor had some pretty cool moments. She wasn't the biggest character, but like when she was chanting death, 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 death. And she also played the middle ground more, making sure she acknowledged every part of the game. She went out of her way to go see Butler and Beatrice at the Golden Land, and I thought she was pretty cool. These two, they made for an exciting pairing that definitely added some excitement to the middle half of Umineko. Okay, I'm gonna try to spitfire a few of the characters that I don't have as much to say about. Kinzo was the wacky head of the family. He was at the center of a lot of the mysteries. I don't like him because of what he did to Beatrice. You can sort that out yourself. I don't want to talk about it. I didn't like that being part of the game. I see how it plays its part, but I just don't, that's not a touchy topic I like to dive into at all. But the reveal of him being dead was an exciting way to kick off the answer arcs, and I wasn't sure either way if he was going to be dead or alive, but it definitely made sense. Nanjia was Kinzo's doctor and close friend. I suspected him for a majority of the game, and I still side-eye him a little bit because his role there was to declare people dead because he's the doctor. But I'm like, oh, you're lasting too long in all these games. He was never one of the first deaths. So I had my good eye on him, and I really thought that he was the killer. I still kind of think he is, because we never got the full confirmation on the truth in Eva's diary. Nanjo's not my main suspect now, but for pretty much the entire game, I don't trust him at all. Rudolph was a terrible father and husband to Butler and Osmu. I definitely buy the ending that him and Kiri were the main villains who caused the downfall of the Ushiromiya family on that fateful family conference day. That's just the behavior I would expect from Rudolph, quite frankly. So, Klaus went into risky business to save a penny, and it was at the expense of his whole family, and he made everybody suffer to keep his secrets. He's a loser. I will say he does have chemistry with Kiri. That's like they had. Why did they have random chemistry in chapter 4? What? But he's a loser. That's it. Hideyoshi was a good man through and through. He really had Eva's back. He was definitely one of the better, more heroic characters within this story, I would say. But he was also kind of a loser, so. And Goda was the one servant who wasn't aware of all the magic happenings. He played that role well, but he doesn't leave much of an impression. Kumasama was the maternal older lady servant who served as a motherly figure over Claire. This was later reflected in Virgilia, who was the maternal witch that Claire created to guide her through the world of magic as her superior. We also had Genji, the classic sidekick butler, who Claire also took inspiration from him to create Renove, the witch butler. I enjoyed both of those characters. I probably enjoyed Kumasama more. The reveal of her as the witch in, I believe it was chapter 3, it was super cool. I wish they did a little bit more with her. And also, we have the 7 sisters of Purgatory who were inspired by the other servants who would just come in and out. The 7 sisters also had an interesting dynamic with Ange in chapter 4. They made for good characters, but since there were so many of them, I remember them as a group. I don't remember any of them individually, and I can't recall any of their individual traits. Besides, I'm pretty sure Lucifer was the leader, but what's that saying? So, I guess this is a good time to mention my general problem with Umineko too. They just had too many characters. Higurashi was so streamlined and every character really played a role. Well, here I would say it was overdone a bit. They definitely did that to serve the purpose of magic overpowering a little bit, but some characters I just feel they didn't serve a purpose at all. We first had the goats, we had the twins of love, and then we had Lenore's 2 sidekicks, Cornelia and Gertrude. I don't have anything to say about these characters. I don't feel like they pop at all. I feel like they just filled out the cast and they're too much. Oh, we had the Chrysler sisters too. Too much. We got too many characters here. I wish the cast was a bit condensed so more of the characters you want to see could have some shine. On to George. George was one of the most boring characters I've ever seen in all the media I've consumed. Anytime he was in the spotlight, I was struggling to power through. Oh my gosh, what a drag. He's the son of Eva. He was raised to be the most responsible. He was also the eldest, so he carried that with him too. He showed himself to be pretty cruel in chapter 6 when he went to kill his own mother. That made him unlikable along with boring. Like, wow, George, really? And he didn't even hesitate to. It was so disturbing to me. His romance with Shannon was also extremely boring, and it dragged Shannon down by relation. Speaking of, I'll move on to Shannon. Originally, I found her uninteresting thanks to her tie to George and also a bit to her tie with Cannon, but there was a little more intrigue there. There was a glimmer of hope with Shannon in chapter 2 when we first saw her connection with Beatrice come to spark, and that was paid off in chapter 7 when it's revealed how tied she is to the backstory of Beatrice. She was Claire's connection to the human world. When she rejected staying in the Golden Land, she was telling Claire about what she was missing on the human world, and that was connection. That was a strong stance for Shannon to take, and I really respected it. We got to see her get left behind by Butler. That was until Claire shifted her attention to George, and it made sense to me because of course that relationship isn't natural. It's too boring to be a thing that happened naturally. Despite chapter 6 being pretty snooze fest to me because of all the relationship drama, it was cool to see Shannon beat Cannon in that final battle. I would say Shannon and Cannon, they had some pretty cool action moments sprinkled throughout. Speaking of, I'll move on to Cannon. Did you know he's furniture? Did you? Because he sure reminded you at every turn that he was furniture. That pretty much sums up Cannon's character, quite frankly. It made total sense when we found out Claire brought Cannon to Shannon so Shannon would have somebody to buddy up with. It was a cool moment when Cannon saved Butler. I'll give him that. Aside from that, Cannon never really stuck out to me, and his relationship with Jessica was also not interesting at all. But I'll move on to Jessica. Despite being stuck with some of the more boring plot points in Umineko, I would say I really did enjoy Jessica as a character. She's the daughter of Natsui and Kraus, and they lived on the island. They had the extra responsibility because Klaus was the oldest of all the siblings. And that, of course, would mean that Jessica would be next in line to take over the Ushiromiya fortune after Klaus. But she didn't lean into the responsibility of that like you would say George would or even Leon did. She was more fun and carefree, a bit childish, and I found that quite endearing. Also in chapter 6, unlike George who immediately rushed to kill his family, Jessica hesitated until Kiri basically talked her into it. I appreciated that she really struggled with that decision. I don't like that she ultimately did have to go down that path, but I appreciated that she actually took some thought. Unlike George. Ugh, George. I could see a world where Jessica made for a compelling main character of Umineko. I could. This next character is a character I'm excited to talk about. It's Natsuhi. I pretty much knew from the start that she'd end up being my favorite character. I was immediately taken to her. The first chapter heavily featured her. She was married to the eldest child of Kinzo, and she, of course, had to take on that responsibility as he was a future head. Or so they assumed. We're introduced to her and we immediately see that she has headaches and she's character is pretty down on her luck. Even at one point, Kinzo pointed out that, wow, not Natsuhi, she just has the worst luck of anybody. She was fated to die in the first chapter, but Maria gave Jessica a good luck charm and Jessica gave it to Natsuhi, and that ultimately kept Natsuhi alive to beat her bad luck. We saw her quickly take charge as the last adult left standing, and she proved to be very capable. I would argue Natsuhi is probably the most capable person of running the Ushiromiya family. She's great in a crisis, and she proved this. And she proved herself to be such a fearsome foe that Beatrice herself gave Natsuhi a respectable death in their gun battle. Because Natsuhi put up quite a fight. But what a strong first chapter she had. At the start of the answer arcs, we jump back to a year before the Fateful Family Conference, and we see they're planning for that year's conference. And just before, Kinzo actually does die. Natsuhi's going about planning it properly when Klaus tells her that Kenzo can't be dead right now. I have all these financial issues because I'm an irresponsible maniac who should be in jail. So Natsuhi has to grapple with the loss of a family member and financial mistakes that could put her whole life at risk. She concocts a plan to fake Kenzo's death for that year's conference, and it goes over smoothly. She even was beginning to see Beatrice and Kenzo with magic. I would say this is our first taste of magic being used as a sort of coping mechanism. Natsui bounces ideas off of Beatrice, and she really befriends the Kinzo who she sees living or through magic or whatever. And that Kinzo really develops a respect for Natsuhi. And we saw that back in the first chapter when Kinzo was telling Natsuhi that she really would be a great leader. And he was right. She would. Magic or not, managing to fake somebody's death for as long as she did without it falling apart is impressive, okay? We move into the actual time frame we've been in for most of the Umineko, and they're trying to frame Natsuhi for the murder. And we see her pretty much get bullied by the witches, by everybody, by Erica. It was bad. You just felt so bad for Natsui, but she stood her ground and she insisted, I did not do this. This is not me. Oh, I felt so bad for her. I feel she stood her ground and she did the best she could, though. Overall, I would say Natsui is a character who has everything working against her, but she does her best despite that to prove she really is a force to be reckoned with. I adore her.
The queen, literally the queen, and that's how I will always address her.
Okay, I had to take a little pause from filming. We're back now, and I will next discuss Rosa. Rosa is the single mother of the Ushiromiya family. She's the mother to Maria. Maria is quite the unique child, and that makes things difficult for Rosa. Sometimes Rosa embraces Maria's attributes. Other times she totally unleashes on Maria. And I would say she's not the best mother. Despite having so much love for Maria, she just has bits of anger, so much so that Maria would say that there's two mommies, the nice one and the evil one. Rosa is one of the more complicated characters here. In a group of complicated characters, you can go from rooting for her, supporting her, to despising her and rooting against her just based off the actions alone. Like 1 second, she'll be ditching Maria to go see her boyfriend, pretending that it's work. But then another second, like for Maria's birthday, she'll make her new stuffed animals handmade Sakutaro. She's shown to be loving to Maria in several instances, but we also have these instances where she appears to just despise Maria. It's an interesting balance that Umineko displays with Rosa. Now, she also has an interesting dynamic with her siblings because they underestimate her as the youngest. She proves to be quite clever at times. Like, she solved the epitaph right after Eva did. She followed Eva in and she was able to force Eva to do what she wanted. I mean, of course, every route she ends up speaking too much and that ends up getting her killed, but she has impressive smarts about her and she's not to be underestimated. But overall, I would say Rosa is a great example for how difficult it is to be a single mother. She has so much weight on her shoulders that she does have to carry, unfortunately. And that's how it is with all the single mothers out there. And just so much respect for the single mothers out there. Next, I'll discuss Maria, Rosa's daughter. She is the character of the Ushiromiya family who's most connected to magic, I would say. Sometimes she just comes off as a sweet and innocent little girl. Other times she comes off as quite creepy. She was so creepy at times. I was like, oh my gosh, Rosa, please calm her down. She's scaring me. Sometimes. Most of the time I was not on Rosa's side on those occasions, but it helps you see like how Rosa could be driven to the place she has. Of course, wrong. Wrong. But gosh, Maria is a handful, okay? But most of the time, I would say Maria represents childhood wonder. Through magic, Maria is able to pretty much view life through a positive viewpoint, even though she has a pretty challenging life. She doesn't have any friends at school. She doesn't get to spend much time with her mother. She doesn't have a father. Again, like how it was with Natsuhi, I would say she uses magic as a sort of coping mechanism to help her get through a challenging time in life. A great example of this would be with Sakutaro, the stuffed animal that Rosa gave her for her birthday. Sakutaro was brought to life with magic. Bringing Sakutaro to life captures the positive moment of Rosa really being there for Maria as a mother and celebrating her birthday, which Rosa put a big priority on. And it allowed Maria to really hold that with her and remember, oh, my mom loves me, even though sometimes she doesn't act like it. And by bringing Sakutaro to life through the magic, that makes it even more devastating when Rosa destroys Sakutaro. While Maria is mostly a positive character, she represents the extremes of emotions. And I would say that's how most children are. They jump from extremes. So she went from extremely happy with Sakutaro, and then she went to the other end when she lost Sakutaro. When Maria was pushed enough, she went fully negative to get revenge on Rosa, and it was quite chilling watching that play out. I like this as a sort of metaphor for a coping mechanism, how if it's used in small doses, it can be helpful. But if it's used too much, it could have negative effects. And I would say this is very represented well through both Maria and Natsuhi's characters, how you just can't jump to the extremes. Maria and Natsuhi both, I think they do the best job of displaying the themes of grief that are found throughout the story of Umineko, and they did the best job at helping me understand the story as a whole. They're both very nuanced characters. The next character is Eva. She is the Ushiromiya sibling who most wanted to be the head, I would say. And she proved her desire most when she was the first sibling to solve the epitaph. Eva showed she had an unmatched drive. She is more ambitious than anybody else. But Eve is grounded by the love of her family. She has a very supportive husband. She has a very respectable son in George who does everything as he's supposed to. Hideyoshi kept Eva reeled in when she would jump to extremes, and she did a great job raising George properly, and that gave her motivations to keep herself in check too. I was originally drawn to Eva because I loved her feisty attitude. She had a bit of a mean streak. She was pretty awful to Natsuhi at first. I mean, of course I was team Natsuhi, but I can't help but love a mean character sometimes, sorry. Not a fun rivalry, but they had an entertaining rivalry. Eva was the main one stirring up trouble at the family conference, I would say. But it all makes sense as you learn more and more how Eva had to work so much harder as a woman in a man's world. She was ultimately able to solve the epitaph with the help of her younger self, who would sort of just pop up and motivate her. And that younger self then became Eva Beatrice, getting a whole ceremony from Beatrice, crowning her, and she went on to become the main antagonist of chapter 3. And gosh, what a vicious villain. Just totally brutal. She did the great job of making you sympathize with Beatrice, which was Beatrice's goal. Eva Beatrice was really the villain of all villains, and she tortured everybody with the new magic she had. She let out all the rage Eva neglected as Eva watched in horror, wanting it to end, proving that she really does care about the family. The parallel between the two Evas made Eva a very sympathetic character. I'd even say Eva Beatrice, she was able to gather some sympathy in her later appearances. Chapter 3 is definitely her big appearance. She does appear again towards the end. Eva managed to be the sole survivor of Chapter 3, and she managed to be the only survivor overall, besides that last minute Bottler twist. And we got the reveal of her relation with Ange, who she took in after everybody passed. I was so happy to see Eva survive, but it was sad to see that her and Ange had such a difficult relationship. So I was very happy to see them come to terms later on and come to an understanding. Overall, I would definitely say Eva is one of the standout characters, definitely one of my favorites. Next is Kiri, the wife of Rudolph. She was the other woman. We originally see Kiri and she's just the cool aunt of the family. She's super fun. She has her wits about her. You're like, okay, I could see how she could manage to work her way into the family pretty easily. She's cool. We continue to learn more about her. We see that she's pretty clever, pretty crafty. She has a lot of similar qualities that we end up seeing in Butler. And it was definitely interesting to see the parallels between those two before we eventually got the reveal that Carrie actually is his mom. Seeing those similar personality traits made the reveal more exciting, but it also made you able to figure it out yourself. Ultimately, Kiri is more complicated than it seems. We get the reveal that she is the side woman who didn't give up until she got her way. Of course, that makes me side-eye Kiri a bit, because why are you trying to break up a marriage? Of course she says that, but he just loved me so much. I do feel sympathy for her, and I could definitely see how Rudolph is the main villain in this situation. He's the evil one. Yes. But Kiri, she does show some pretty evil thoughts about Asmu, and it's understandable, but you still look at Kiri like, ooh, you're kind of evil. But again, because Rudolph is so terrible, you can sympathize with Kiri. Like, we get the reveal that he swapped Kiri's baby Butler for Asmu's baby who was stillborn, and Kiri thought this whole time that she had the stillborn baby. Just, oh, so disgusting. Asmu is a character we never meet. I'm still wanting to side with her because of just how awful the situation is. And I'm sure if she was introduced, Kiri would seem like even more of a villain. So you're just left to wonder, like, what's Asmu like? I completely buy into the Chapter 7 theory that the ultimate truth is that Kiri and Rudolph were the main villains who took down the whole family. I think Kiri just has the most motivation. She has the least connection to the family, so she'd care the least. It made sense to me. Overall, I just think she's a super cool character and she perfectly captures the campy murder mystery villain aspect. But she is a character that you can root for, you can be on her side, you can sympathize with. I really enjoyed Kiri. Next is Berncastel, who's basically Rika. I pretty much read her as Rika the whole time. Of course, thinking she's Rika, I automatically ticked her because I adore Rika. So she's the Witch of Miracles who starts out on the side of Butler, but eventually as things unfold, they end up on opposing sides, and by the end of it, Berncastel's pretty much the main villainous force that everybody's working against. Bern Castell was just bored and she was playing a game. I mean, that's a pretty compelling motivation. Boredom really leads to some dangerous things, okay? But having such a simple motivation as a character, it makes her really fun. And seeing how with such a simple motivation you can do such evil things, just not really care, that adds to the lore of the wishes. How, wow, they'll just do anything. They don't get it because they're not human. Bern Castell also drops some of the most mind-altering quotes throughout the story. She just is a little quote box, and I still am reflecting on some of them. Like, wow, that is a game changer. Some really impressive writing presented in Umineko. And a lot of it was through Bern Castell. She just has such unique insights that, like, wow, I can't believe it. I never thought of that, but wow. It's cool to see a, like, what if Rika went mad after being tormented for so long. That's pretty much how I took it. It was fun. Now, if I'm talking about Bern Castell, I have to talk about Lambda Delta next, and Lambda Delta was basically Satoko. Of course, I do prefer Rika over Satoko, but I also took to Lambda Delta very quickly based off the fact of her being pretty much Satoko. I will say, in regards to Go Sotsu, I have some issues with how Satoko's character played out there, but I still think it's a unique choice to make for the character, and I do respect it. So it doesn't ruin Satoko's character. I just definitely side with Rika. But here I would say I have Bern Castell and Lambda Delta. They're both on even playing ground because it is a different story, so I just took them for face value, besides the added context of like, oh, they're like these characters I know. But also I would say at the beginning, I definitely was siding with Bern Castell over Lambda Delta, because Lambda definitely had her creepy obsession with Bern Castell. This was a little off-putting. It was off-putting when Satoko developed it. It was off-putting here, but it was fun. It was fun to see their dynamic, for sure. I just adore Lambda Delta though, okay? She is so cool. She was originally on the side of magic because that was the side against Bern Castell. She only joined because she wanted to mess with Bern Castell. That's pretty much her main motivation. I'd say she wasn't as invested in the game as Bern Castell. She was just more interested in Bern Castell. And then at the end there, Lambda Delta said she was there for the entertainment, but we ultimately get her joining the hero's side and joining the fight, and it was so cool to see Lambda Delta really take on the hero role. I really loved that for her. She didn't win her fight. I mean, she's going against Featherine. What chance did she stand? But she really put up a good fight and so much respect. It was devastating when we lost her, but she's back. I was so relieved that she was brought back. It really did warm my heart when I Googled the character ranking result, and Lambda Delta really did make the top 3. Like, you did it! You did it! Oh, the fourth wall breaking. Oh, it was fun. Lambda Delta is such a fun character. I really enjoyed her. It was interesting to put her in the more heroic lens when we're so used to Rika being the hero in the situation. Last, but certainly not least, is Featherine. Featherine was one of the later additions to the cast. She was introduced as a writer telling the tale of the Ushiromiya family. Ange hunted her down because she wanted to get her insight, and Featherine took her in as her Miko to read through the next game. Featherine does enjoy their time together. She's impressed with Ange's reading, and she promises to write Angie a satisfying story one of these days, and we did get that payoff in the end when she brought back Butler in his amnesic state. I thought that was a really cool idea. Like, wow, you've got all that power and you're using it to help Ange. I just think Featherine is such a cool character. She's one of the standouts to me. While she's not particularly depicted as a villainous threat in the story, she is on the opposing side towards the end, but we're also shown that she is very threatening and intimidating. She's definitely the most powerful witch on the board right now, but she was just presented as a spectator, so she didn't get to be as involved in the story. I really did appreciate seeing her on the sidelines, though. She had an interesting role to play. Despite being on the sidelines, Featherine carries herself in such a way that demands respect, and she gets the respect. She especially stuck out to me as a writer. She had a lot of interesting things to say. As a writer myself, I was just very taken to that part of the story in particular. Like, wow, she's saying some real interesting stuff here, and let me just take notes. But Featherine was also a pretty insightful character, and I enjoyed her every move, honestly. Her face-off with Lambda Delta was over before it even started. That's just how powerful a writer is, okay? Don't mess with the writers. But it was so, oh my gosh, it was crazy cool. It was sad. It was like, oh my gosh, Featherine, how's anybody gonna take you? You're just such a threat. They're lucky she was just spectating the Witched Theater going. She was just there to watch, okay? Now, of course, we all know that Featherine represents a certain Gosatsu character. And I definitely want to see more of Featherine. I want to see her actually get to be involved in a story for once instead of just spectating. I'm just craving more Featherine. I need more. I want to see everything Featherine has to offer. I feel like I just got a taste of Featherine when I feel like there is a whole story to tell here. Let's give the Witch of Theater going a chance to take center stage. I would like to see it. That wraps up all the characters I wanted to talk about. I'm sure I missed a few. I got all the main ones, but just so many characters here. But overall, I really did enjoy Umineko. I had some frustrations with it. It was hard to get through. It was my first read, so the mystery is confusing, but I pushed through, and I'm glad I did. This is definitely a story worth telling, and while Higurashi is definitely my preference, Umineko, phenomenal. I will definitely get on here and discuss Higurashi one of these days. I might want to brush up on it a bit just so I'm fresh, but I'm such a huge fan of Higurashi. I'm also now a fan of Umineko. There will definitely be more coverage of the When They Cry franchise over here, so stay tuned. Until next time, bye.